In the first video, we set the groundwork by reminding ourselves about news values, by considering angles, and by setting general parameters for news story writing style. Now we're going to get into the detail of how to write a news story. Here is a basic outline of news story structure. We will look at each of these in detail as we work our way through this video. You're going to practice news story writing by building up some parts of a story using the news story topic we started to explore in the last video, someone winning an award. Let's say the winner is a young woman who has won a business award for her business and that the business focuses on diversity. First of all, let's tackle a headline. Here are some tips. Headlines should be short. 7 or 8 words is optimum, but a little shorter or a little longer is fine. They should include key words that highlight the topic, and they should include these early. They should be written in the present tense. This can seem counterintuitive because with news you're always reporting on things that have already happened. So you can easily veer into past tense and you might think that's the sensible tense to use for it. But present tense is a key aspect of news writing style, so keep it present. Finally, headlines should use action words, words that paint a picture of something happening. Examples are opens, announces, launches, and condemns. Using that advice, try to write a headline for our broad story. Pause the video here until you've had a go at this. Here is my suggestion for a headline. How does it compare with yours? Now let's move on to the rest of the news story. News stories are written in what is called an inverted pyramid structure. Here is a diagram that nicely represents it. Likening it to this shape really helps us to get the idea of how news works, I think. It illustrates that the key points must be at the beginning, with smaller, finer details appearing later in the story. Again, this can seem counterintuitive. Our experience of stories, again except the more experimental films or TV dramas, is that they're written in chronological order. That is, the events are recounted in the order in which they happened. We might therefore think that the logical way to write a news story is to give the whole backstory and then add in the most recent newsy points. In fact, the way to do it is the other way round. The newsy stuff comes first, and then you fill in the backstory. The reason for this is twofold, though the two reasons are related to one another. First of all, think about the way you read news stories. Even if you think you're a person who's not that into news, I'm sure you sometimes click on stories that friends or family share on social media. How do you engage with those? Do you read them all the way through? I'm guessing not. We quite often just read the early part of a news story and then scroll on past. Or in old language, turn the page. If you think about it then, if the newsy stuff came at the end, many readers would never see it. It makes sense, therefore, to start with the most recent and therefore most important information. The second and related reason is that editors cut stories from the bottom. It's probably easier to think about this in relation to hard copy newspapers, but it still absolutely applies for online news. In hard copy newspapers, there's only a limited amount of space on the page for the stories. It's a pretty intricate jigsaw puzzle to get everything to fit just right. And that will often include cutting a few sentences or a few paragraphs from the bottom of a story. Or it might just be that the editor thinks the story doesn't deserve quite so much airtime or page time as the journalist has given it, and just wants to trim it down a bit. Here is a more detailed illustration of the inverted pyramid structure. For our purposes, we can focus on just the first three of these. We will be writing relatively short news articles and press releases, which, as you'll learn next week, should be as concise as possible. The final two sections only really relate to longer, more drawn-out articles. After the headline, the lead sentence is the next thing to tackle. The lead sentence is simply the first sentence in the story. As outlined at the top of the more detailed inverted pyramid illustration, if at all possible, this one sentence should contain the 5 key words: who, what, where, when, and why. Let's do another task. Taking the story we have been focusing on, try to write a lead sentence for it. I'll share mine in a moment, so do pause the video to write your own, so that you can compare and contrast it with mine. Here's my lead sentence. This is not a right answer, it's just the way I chose to represent the information. The key question is, did you get all the question words answered in your lead sentence? The body content of your news article, that is, the rest of the story following the headline and the lead sentence, should follow some style guidelines too, though these are a bit less specific than the guidelines for the headline and lead sentence. Here they are. And finally, quotes. You should include at least one quote in each news story you write. More if you wish. The quote or quotes should be from someone central to the story to ensure credibility. If you're including more than one quote, you could, for example, have one from the head of the organisation, one from a regular person on the street who will benefit from the new product or the event or the situation or whatever, and maybe one from a local political representative. Quotes should contain opinion, not information, and quotes must bring something new to the table. There's no point in having the quote repeat something you have already written in the key information earlier in the story. Not only does that waste copy by repeating information, it's also very likely that if you do this, you have chosen a quote that doesn't contain much opinion or personal approach. There are some genres of written communication, speeches for example, where repetition makes for a better end product, but in news writing it should absolutely be avoided. Let's do a final task for this video. Imagine you interview the person who won the award and they say the following. What would you choose as your quote from them to put in your news story? Pause the video and note down a few choices and your thoughts about them. What choices did you make? The first sentence isn't appropriate for a quote, is it? It's factual information, which, if your story is well written, you will already have covered in the body content. The second sentence could potentially be part of a quote because it begins to explore the thoughts and the feelings of the winner. With the third sentence, we're really getting into the zone of opinion and emotion. This sentence would be perfect for a quote. The fourth sentence is again informational content that you will have very likely already covered. However, the fifth sentence could work as a quote because it brings in the winner's feelings about meeting one of the judges. So, if it were me, I would choose the third and fifth sentences of this longer quote to include in the quote in my story. If I had been advised by my editor to keep the word count low, I would go for just the third sentence because I think it's the most suitable one. I hope you enjoyed exploring the mechanics of news writing and the more subtle subtleties and nuanced choices we make when writing in this genre. As with every genre of written communication, practice will improve your work. Crucially, so will reading the work of others to compare your work against. The more news stories you read, the more of a sense you will get for how to write like a news writer. Even if you're not a big one for news ordinarily, try to get into the habit of reading at least one written news story per day. And try to mix it up a bit as regards where you get this news from. All of these will follow a similar structure to what we have looked at today, but reading pieces from different news providers will also improve your sense of the types of news values and representations we find in different types of news outlets, as we've discussed before. I would also say, don't forget the funny stuff. Reading satirical news stories is an extremely useful way of getting familiar with news story structure. The best of them work so well as satire precisely because they use news story structure so well. They therefore look real and their satirical effects stand out even more. So do have a laugh while you're studying news writing and check out these satirical websites. In our final video for this week, we'll be thinking about some of the bigger picture aspects you need to consider when writing news stories. And we'll be thinking about the effectiveness of press releases, which we'll learn how to write next week. See you in the next video.